at Adurio, we are all about stakeholder feedback. We're all about making sure that your community is heard when making important decisions. And so as the kind of topic of phone usage in schools and access to different things on the internet has got more and more pressing, we want to help people to think about how to make these decisions. So we've assembled a collection of people who can hopefully help you today. So I'll pass over now. Lizzie, do you want to introduce yourself and kind of why you're part of the panel?
Yeah, so I'm Lizzie Hacking. I'm the Director of External Affairs for Yondr, who are the pioneer of phone-free schools for the past 11 years. And I think I've got the best job in the whole world because I basically spend all my time speaking to really inspirational school leaders, researchers, activists, and legislators from all across the world who are facing exactly the same issues that we all are on the school.
Serdar, do you want to go next?
Thank you, Iona, and thank you, Lizzie. Hello, everyone. I'm Serdar Ferret. I'm a former filmmaker and media studies teacher. And 9 years ago, I co-founded Lifter. Lifter is an education technology platform that lifts children out of their everyday realities and shows them the world through really high quality, immersive short documentary films. And one of our focus areas is critical digital literacy, which is, I think, why I'm here today.
Fabulous. And last but not least, Dami.
Hi everyone, I'm Dami Ajapona. I'm the Deputy Head Pastoral at a school in Hertfordshire called Hitchin Boys School. In September, we launched Yondr pouches and they have been truly transformational. So I think I'm here to talk about why we went down this road and the challenges we faced and the implementation just in terms of the nuts and bolts of making it happen in the school.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. So I think just as a quick kind of context setting, I will run through a little bit of kind of big picture stuff, talking about some of where we are with the research, some of the national context. Then Dami will pass over to you for an understanding of what it's been like at Hitchin Boys and how you kind of got to the point where you thought we need a solution and what the different solutions are that you have explored. You mentioned Yondr. There's a kind of set of policies and approaches that you guys have taken. Then we'll hand over to Lizzie and Serdar to discuss a bit more in depth about the implementation of these different options. So as I say, if I start with that kind of big picture, I think there's a sense that this conversation is growing and growing. The Children's Commissioner conducted a study earlier this year that was published in April, looking at kind of the different approaches that are being taken in schools. Found that overall there's kind of a range of policies. Some of them kind of allow pupils to use their phones during particular times. Others have solutions like Yondr, which are you can bring your phone into school, but we will enforce its kind of lockdown during the course of the day. Others who have said kind of full no phones allowed on the school premises. Beyond that, we have a kind of understanding from the research that there is a sort of non-statutory guidance that has been given out by the Department of Education. Most schools in the country are following that non-statutory guidance, but there's the kind of nuance of the application that is kind of is up for discussion. Particularly, there isn't a kind of hard and fast. This is the way that you need to handle this within your school. And the study found that 99.8% of primary schools, so almost every primary school in the country, and 90% of secondary schools have a policy that limits pupils' phone use to an extent. But then the question is, what is the right extent? What are the kind of different factors that we need to think about there? So that's kind of a sort of big picture from the sort of what is going on at the moment. I also want to share a little bit of data from the Adurio Pupil Learning Experience and Wellbeing Survey. We've been tracking pupil wellbeing in schools since 2020, and we've seen a kind of year-on-year decline as we've kind of come out of the COVID year. So even within the sort of height of COVID, well-being was actually higher than it was in a couple of years afterwards. So we've seen a kind of steady decline year on year in pupil well-being. And we've also seen some kind of particularly challenging areas when we look at age, well-being declining as pupils get older, with particular drop-offs in year 8, and a slight improvement into sixth form, but overall well-being declining as pupils are getting older. And we're also seeing a challenge when we look at the gender of pupils. So when we did the study first in 2020, we found that boys had the highest level of well-being, so they were more likely to respond positively to the question around well-being than girls were. That's still the case, and the gap is widening. So over time, the well-being of girls is worsening faster than the well-being of boys from a point that was already lower. And I think there is kind of quite a lot of discussion and a growing evidence base around the link between phone usage and social media and what people are accessing on the internet and the impact of that on well-being. So I'm kind of here in my capacity as the kind of data guy. I want to sort of set that sort of scene, set that challenge, and share the kind of context that we're working in. But I do think this is something that it is timely that we are talking about it now. And it's important that we kind of come together as across the sector, share ideas and share solutions. Yes, I can see a question about findings in the report. I'll post a link to the report in the chat now. I'll also post a link to the stuff from the Children's Commissioner as well. But now I've kind of set the scene. Dami, do you want to talk us through your story? Do you want to talk us through kind of how you've approached this at Hitchin Boys?
Yes, so this is my second posting as a deputy head. I did 5 years in London, and when I came out here, it's a very different demographic. It's a lovely place. It's actually quite a paradise-style place to teach. And I found myself in a similar position to many other school leaders where one can lull oneself into a false sense of security around, we don't have a problem with phones. So we had what, as you pointed to, over 90% of secondary schools have, which is a permissive ban, I would call it, where you can have your phones, but you can't have it on you. So you can't have it visible. But we were finding that, of course, they were having it visible. We have quite a large rural estate. I don't know if you can see it out of the window behind me. And it meant that by the time a teacher walked over, the phone had disappeared. And then one had to make the choice between an argument over what I saw as a teacher or what was going on. And we thought long and hard about what to do about it. We had incidents where teachers and other pupils certainly were being furtively filmed. It's very easy to whip a phone out and for it to be invisible and then film someone. We obviously had incidents where children would go into cubicles and use their phones. At lunchtime, the toilets were always packed and there was not much proper use of toilets going on. And so we thought about where to go next. I saw Yonder at a school, an independent school, Berkhamsted School, and I remember looking at one of the unlocking magnets and asking the deputy head there, what is that? And he told me you get 3 guesses. And when he finally, I didn't guess what it was. When he finally told me what it was, I was very, very taken. So I came back, this was about February last year. I came back and I said to my head teacher, Tim Bennett, this seems like a great idea. And then we consulted with pupils. I say consulted. We talked to them about why we were thinking of heading in this way. We consulted with parents. We had a lot of support from Yonder in that they came and did a school visit. Their whole thing is a phone-free space. And then we did the hard launch in September. As a partial deputy head of 8 years now, it has been transformational, just in terms of, or I would say, as the bandwidth it gives you back as a pastoral team. You are not having those constant niggling conversations that revolve around this environment that you can't have sight into. It gives you bandwidth in the sense that the children come to you and talk to you more because they don't go off and message home or message each other. So you're able to take steps very quickly. And it also gives you, from a pastoral point of view, an extra lever, because you know as a safeguarding lead that if something happens on a phone in your school, it is such a gross breach of your behavior policy that any action that you take quickly brings it to a crisis and resolution. So I think I've had about 10, maybe Lizzie will correct me there, other schools visit who were considering it, and every single one has left thinking this is just the right thing to do.
That's great. Thanks so much for sharing that. And you also spoke about a kind of an approach you've taken around phone usage and device usage. Can you share a little bit more about how you've kind of weighed up the options of when you can use a device for teaching, the benefits of having the device involved, and and how you've kind of policed that now you've kind of introduced the ban on phones within the school day?
Yeah, so, you know, one of the arguments against Yonder Pouches is that they disempower children and they make them feel as if we don't respect them and are controlling them. And I think, you know, the responses to that, greater minds have turned their heads to it than mine, in that, you know, Jonathan Haidt's book will make explicit to anybody who's interested why we can't really argue that children should have unrestricted access to mobile phones 24/7. I think from our point of view, where we came at it from was one of our values, or one of the principles that Hitchin Boys runs on, is compassion. And we said you cannot give compassion without empathy, and you can't be empathetic without paying attention. And so to be able to pay attention to another human being, you need to be able to look at them and give them the time that they need for you to recognize their humanity. And that was why we instituted pouches. We thought about, you know, lockable cabinets. I think they sometimes call them phone jails. We considered that because I can see a question in the chat saying how much they cost. Because it is quite a significant capital expenditure for a school, and we considered whether we should hold off on that and go for the phone cages. But then when you think about the time cost of a staff member locking them and unlocking them, and indeed the liability, you know, one of these devices will cost on average £600 or £700. If you've got a class of a form group of 30, you multiply that by, we've got 1,300 boys here, that's a lot of liability for a school to carry. It only takes 1 or 2 phones to go missing before you find yourself in a world of pain. And finally, the other reason why we went for Yonder Pouches is because we wanted to demonstrate to the boys that this matters to us, and that we respect your devices enough to get the market leader in this. You know, there are obviously cheaper versions of lockable pouches, but having considered all of that, because it was a difficult process to get it through the senior team around agreeing to lay out the funds for Yonder, we considered the cheaper alternatives, and they just felt like that. They felt very, very cheap, and they felt easily breakable. And they also felt just as if we weren't being mindful when we were trying to talk to the children about being mindful in our phone usage. So, you know, I think I've gone around the houses there a bit, forgive me. But to return to what we now do is they lock their phones as they come through the gates, and they don't unlock them until the end of the day. And we have one-to-one devices, Chromebooks. So we've also had to think about, as a whole, how we approach and manage the use of the internet. And that has been a really interesting offshoot of instituting lockable pouches.
Yeah, and can you just share a bit more about that, how you balance that? Because it's sort of locking away a phone straight onto their other device. How did you manage to make sure that that's kind of tackled?
Yeah, so, you know, of course, almost every app you can get on your phone, you can also get on Chromebook, right? So we've had to really adjust our teaching and learning approaches, whether that means where we expect our teachers to position themselves when they are using Chromebooks so they can see all screens, the software that we pushed across all Chromebooks so that we can see when the child is on a school account rather than on their private account with immediate and effective ease. And also at a deeper level, the pedagogy, as in, asking teachers, are you really thinking about whether you need to use Chromebook for this lesson? Because we had found that we instituted them quite some time ago, maybe 6 years ago now, if not longer. And it was great as a teacher. I'm an English teacher by trade. It was wonderful. You could, plan a lesson in 10 minutes because it was click, 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 follow these links, read this, answer this, I'll talk a little bit. And then, the lesson sort of runs itself. And one of the other benefits of this has been deeper conversations about how children learn and whether we need to use these tools and how we use them in an effective, safe way.
Awesome. And as you said, around kind of, what apps are restricted and understanding kind of what's the, when they're using their personal accounts. Do you know what software it is you're using to flag that?
I do not. I think that we use RM, which is and it's Smoothwall, I think we use, but don't quote me on that. My last brush with IT was a GNVQ in 1997, so I cannot be quoted on that.
No, that's all good. Yeah, I was thinking, as you were saying, there's an organisation called Blackout Technologies, who their software was, I think it was built for big driving fleets, like big delivery companies and stuff, and they've created a kind of location and time based block on various things, and that's something that they've sort of started moving into the education space as a kind of, rather than physically locking the phone away, having sort of time-based or app-based blocks, as well as obviously kind of general firewalls and stuff that the school may be using. Serdar, I'd love to bring you into the conversation. Dami mentioned Jonathan Haidt, and I know that you are kind of, you spent a lot of time kind of understanding his point of view. Your digital curriculum is all about what to do in those moments when we have access to the phone, when we are kind of roaming free on the internet, how do we make those good decisions? Can you share a little bit about your kind of digital curriculum and what you're doing there?
Thank you, Iona. Actually, Lifter doesn't work on phones. And as a former filmmaker, there's nothing that hurts me more than someone picking up a phone when there's a film on. And I think what I really liked about what Jonathan Haidt said, because a lot of people conflate what he's saying with let's not show any video content in classrooms. But he explained that kids have a very different relationship to YouTube clips and TikTok clips versus movies. And he broke it down. He said, firstly, a movie is something that you often watch on a big screen with another person. It's a social activity, and Lifter is experienced on a screen as a social activity in a classroom. He said that the duration of the TikTok clips and the YouTube clips also are harmful in the long run because they're so short. And also films and documentaries often have a moral framework in the narrative. So he outlined these, and that made me really happy when I went to his talk. But why am I here? I want to sort of people might be wondering why I'm here. I'm from a company that produces content for screens. What we're doing with Lifter is we're trying to teach children about the complexity of the world through human stories. The world is getting more and more complex each day. This is the most complex the world will ever be today. The world has ever been today. It's also the least complex it will ever be. And we have to nurture our children to survive and thrive and flourish in this even more complex world than today. And what we're trying to do at Lifter, what we're doing at Lifter, is we are we're making this accessible through high quality human focused documentary stories and lessons, so they can see outside of their narrow bubbles. And most children don't leave their own postcodes, or hardly leave their own postcodes. And that's what we're told often by school leaders. As I said earlier, one of our focus areas is critical digital media literacy. And we've been working on a course for a number of years, and we've just released it. It's a course that focuses on critical digital and media literacy, and it's about instilling healthy habits so that when children and young people do engage with phones and computers and social media in particular, that they form healthy habits. And in this course, we cover things like digital and media literacy, critical thinking. We introduce AI, algorithms, bias and stereotypes, misinformation, disinformation, echo chambers. We talk about habits and addiction, image manipulation, deep fakes, but we also zoom out and look at collective responsibility and belonging. And as Danny said, compassion is really, really important. How do we treat people in the digital world? So it's very much a complementary solution to what Lizzie is going to be talking about, which is a very direct solution to basically locking mobile phones up.
Lovely, yeah. We had for everyone else's information, we had a funny moment when we got together as a panel group to kind of plan the session, and I said I thought it was a really nice combination to have Yonder, who are the kind of limiting use of the phone and taking out of their hands, and then Lifter, who are helping with what we do when phones and when access to the internet is within people's capability. And Dami kind of challenged me and said, it's not a dichotomy, that this isn't one or the other. This is about what is the kind of combination of those different things, and when is one thing the right answer and when is the other. And I think you're totally right, Serdar. This is about complementing these things. Kids have phones, that there's no getting away from that, but how do we make sure that when they are accessing the internet and they are accessing content online, they're able to think about it in a kind of safe and self-aware and kind of critical way. So yeah, that's excellent. Lizzie, I think it's time to bring you in. Share us. We've heard from Dami around kind of the kind of decision making, but do you want to give us a bit more detail on kind of why the pouches exist and how to think about it as someone who might be thinking of implementing it?
Yeah, thank you very much, Iona. So I just want to pick up on a point Dami made about the idea of phones not being visible does not mean that they're not present. And I think there's a real confusion, especially your point raised about the Children's Commissioner report recently about the difference between a phone ban and like a truly phone-free environment and the impact that has, especially within an educational setting. And I think one of the two most luxury commodities in 2025 are both peace and privacy. And the idea that actually, having these protected spaces for society away from technology is exactly the same idea as a national park protecting nature. And I think going forwards, this is going to become the norm. And within an educational setting, what we see is a complete transformation of behaviour. So one example of this is in a properly phone-free school, you'll see a huge increase in the number of meals eaten in the cafeteria, purely because children are so afraid of the idea that someone's going to film their tray secretly and post it online and judge them. And this concept that actually everything they do is so public. And just to give a slightly different angle from Dami, who's obviously coming from a boys' school, with girls, we see time and time again that they do not feel they're in a safe space to make mistakes, because every single thing they do is part of their permanent branding from an incredibly young age. And we all know that as teenagers, we go through big periods of discovering our identity. We do really stupid things. And that is all part of growing up. We need to be able to be free to express ourselves in those sorts of ways, learn from our peers, and then move on from it. But actually, this is the generation that does not get to forget. So what we are really, really promoting is the idea that rather than a phone ban, where we're saying, put it off, put it away, the onus is then on the student. They're very aware of the phone the whole time. We see students who do not break any other rule constantly reaching into their bag to be able to check what's going on. It's that fear of missing out. Are they being bullied continually throughout the day without the teacher even being fully aware of it? teachers then the whole relationship between teacher and student changes, because teachers are the bad guys who are like playing whack-a-mole the entire time, trying to say, put your phone away, put your phone away. So in order to create this sort of safe space and this dynamic where true expression can happen, we need to remove the phones. And the idea is that Yondr then locks it away and creates that environment in order for children to be able to be children. I just want to give an example of one of our schools who I won't name, but this is how I think we've forgotten the dynamic of what it is to kind of be a teenager and have some fun. So Dami mentioned the idea of like how bathrooms and how that whole relationship's changed, and lots of things now happen in that sort of space. We had one of our heads who was called to a bathroom incident and was like, oh, here we go. You know, that sense of sort of sinking feeling of dread and what is happening now. And he walked in and there was just bubbles everywhere. And this group of year 10s had basically created a slip and slide that they were then, you know, creating absolute mayhem, but there were no implications that happened away from that. So in a normal school, you would see that would then be straight online. Everyone would be aware of it. The sanctions would then have to be so much higher. Parents would then already be involved. And actually, what happened in this situation was they got pulled aside quietly, as they would have done 10 years ago, to be like, guys, you're like 15 years old. And what you're doing is you're truanting in order to create a bubbly mess. And actually, then, you know, the situation was dealt with then. They were able to move on from it. Parents were, you know, were like notified in the correct timeline, and everything was absolutely fine. So I think we just need to get away from that sense that everything is escalated so much higher. Mistakes can be made, but they're made and they're managed appropriately, rather than it becoming like a, I suppose, like a identity defining situation.
That's really cool. It's sort of, yeah, that's a mistake. It's quite a silly and fun one. There's an innocence to it, but
It is quite funny, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely naughty. But yeah, I can imagine if I'd done that and eventually my parents had found out about it, versus I know they've seen a recording of it. I've got to go home and they've already made up their mind about this. I know I'm going to be in an awful lot of trouble. I think that sort of anxiety that you would get around that as well. It's sort of, yeah, you're, like you say, you're more in control of the narrative. That maybe for better or worse in some cases, but I do think that safe space to make mistakes is really important.
Yeah, it slows the whole process down. So what you'll see, especially regarding teacher wellbeing, is that in a classroom, if there's an incident where a teacher has to discipline a child, rather than them thinking behind the scenes, they've already gone to the parent's then gone to senior management, everything's escalated during that lesson period, they're able to follow the correct procedures that the school has set, and they can manage it internally. And I think that's really important from a sense of like a teacher feeling empowered to be able to deal with the student relationship independently without parents sort of intervening, or there being disinformation and anything that sort of makes that teacher feel uncomfortable doing their job. And just to point to, following on from the Jonathan Haidt comments, there's a absolutely fantastic report that Policy Exchange did called the Disconnect Report, which Jonathan Haidt did the foreword to, which goes through all the different types of sort of phone ban, phone free environment, and other approaches that schools can take. So if anyone's interested in sort of looking at some research around that, it's all around what's been successful and what hasn't in UK schools.
Yeah, I'll add. I've got a comment that I'm writing that's got a list of all of the research and resources that we're mentioning. I'll add the disconnect one in there. There's one additional bit of data I wanted to pull in, which is from the Ajurio safeguarding survey. This is something we launched a couple of years ago. We asked a variety of questions, including kind of how safe they felt in school, out of school, and online. And we were surprised by the findings. We found that the lowest proportion was in school. So it was still a good chunk. 75% of pupils said that they felt safe in school, 78% out of school. So that would include to and from school, but also at home. 88% said that they felt safe online. So they were more likely to feel safe online than they were in school. And we had some kind of discussions around that. What does that mean? And sort of thinking about the kind of like the more insidious nature of online stuff. It might not be sort of you're being physically bullied, but if you're getting kind of comments online or something that you're not comfortable with. And Lizzie, you mentioned about like, do we know if you're a teacher stood at the front of the class? In the olden days, you would probably know if someone was being bullied. You could see them being kicked under the under the in the back of their chair. At worst, maybe there was a note going around that you still could see that physical movement, whereas now it's much harder. We one of the things in the survey is asking among the pupils that said they had felt unsafe in school, where in the school were they? And for most things, it was sort of a kind of flip around. That those who had felt unsafe, the locations went like this, and then for those who felt safe, we asked them where they felt safest, and it was sort of the other way around, apart from the classroom. So the classroom was the third highest place where people felt unsafe after the corridor and the playground or school grounds, but it was also the place they felt safest. So there's something in there around, like, yes, it is that sort of space you're in, there's only 30 of you there, but what is it that's going on in the classroom that's also kind of, yeah, you may look like it's safe, and for those who feel safe, it may genuinely be safe, but something is going on for those. It was 27% of those who had felt unsafe said that it was the classroom where it was that they were when they felt unsafe. So I think something around how we identify what does it look like, what are the kind of physical symptoms of these challenges.
And if I could just quickly add to that, in terms of sort of physical altercations. So we tend to see our schools report that almost completely collapses, because actually most students do not want to square up to each other and actually have a physical fight. But if a phone is held up in front of them, they almost are forced to sort of follow through. And I'm sure Dami can probably chip in and add to this. And most of those instances are also arranged during school time on messaging. So I think back to your point about feeling safe, if all of this is going on behind you and you're the victim, you're a student who's aware that that's sort of bubbling, that must feel really quite anxiety inducing.
Look, at every level in terms of psychology, we know that all human beings require space away from others to individuate, or for want of a better word. And with the constant presence of a phone and constant connection, you never have that space to individuate. You can't say you are reflecting if you are constantly receiving a stream of information. Just in pure input versus processing speed, you can see why, if I'm having a constant stream of input from my friends of quite complex emotions when I'm a teenager, I will struggle to process that and respond in a reasonable way. In fact, I will more than struggle. I will either shut down and turn to anxiety and return to the basic fight or flight mechanisms, or I will just make irrational decisions. So when I talked earlier about the amount of bandwidth this has given us, I can't overstate that, and maybe I need to expand on that as a partial deputy head. So we have gone from heads of year having to deal with about 20 to 30 incidents across the 7 year groups that started on a phone to, I would say, on a monthly basis, we receive one. We have not had a single incident where a parent has emailed us to say something happened online over the weekend or overnight, and we're asking you to look into it because it concerns 2 boys at your school. Because by engaging with them and putting the phones in the pouches, we started a discussion which signals to them that from our point of view, we as the adults in this situation will manage the children's access to social media. And when they're with you, which they are for 16 hours of a day, we expect you to do the same. And actually what we found is that the fights have gone down because there just isn't any impetus. I think when we were talking about this earlier, I said, the moment you have a phone on you, it heightens the stakes because you know that this moment is going to be captured. So the questions that are being asked of you when you would ordinarily, as a boy, do you really want to fight this person? The questions are just a case of how hurt am I in terms of my ego? How much do I feel like I need to demonstrate a sense of self to the others who are here watching, maybe 4 or 5 others? Those questions become much more high stakes, right? If there's a phone present, then that question is really about how do you want to present yourself to the world? Because of course, any video that's captured in a school can be around the world within seconds. So that question is a huge one to ask a teenager to answer. Whereas when they have conflicts, as they will do now, children are always going to scramble and scrap with each other. But Now they are much quicker. The resolutions are much quicker because there is no trail or news cycle constantly going, if you see what I mean, as in when it's filmed, there's a constant news cycle which you as the belligerent are having to respond to all the time. Whereas if it's not filmed, then there is no news cycle beyond the 24 or 48 hours of dealing with it with your friends and your family and the school. So everything has changed. I keep coming back to it. It's been transformational. I've been doing this job for 8 years, longer as a teacher, but as a deputy head pastoral, it has been the most instrumental thing that I have found as a pastoral deputy head. I tell Yonder all the time, I'm a Yonder evangelist. It just makes sense on every level, as a parent of 2, as a school leader, as an English teacher, as someone who practices mindfulness. It just makes sense. It's something that I almost think is settled science, really.
Thanks so much. And Serdar, can you share a little bit about the kind of impact that your schools see of working with LIFTA and doing the digital literacy course?
Yeah, we've just released the digital literacy course, but the general impact of LIFTA is we're told that children's behaviour changes. They become more compassionate and understanding to their peers. They become more curious about different people from different identities and backgrounds, and they feel really respected and taken seriously when they're watching the content, because the content is really, really high quality. Our head of stories is an Oscar winner, and one of our main unique selling points is that the quality of the content is super, super high, because we realized really early on that children feel like they're being taken seriously. And when you compare it to other sort of online safety materials, it's in another league. So I can't yet speak about the impact of the critical digital literacy stuff per se. We have had some of the content on critical digital literacy in LIFTA for a while. What we've done recently is we've put it into a coherent 12-lesson scheme of work, which we feel is really comprehensive. Previously, it was just sort of lessons here and there, but now we've got this comprehensive scheme of work for primary and for secondary, and I know that sixth formers are also using the secondary one.
And can you share a bit about the sorts of things that will cover?
I can actually. Do you know what? Our director of education, who is brilliant, recently shot this video, and I think, if I may, I'd just like to show that video because she says it a lot better than I will. Is that all right?
Welcome to LIFTA's Critical Digital and Media Literacy course. My name is Harriet Marshall. I'm LIFTA's Director of Education and Impact, and I've worked with the LIFTA team to develop this course with great care so that the content and pedagogical approach are both evidence-informed and relevant. We live in a world where reality is increasingly shaped by algorithms, performance, and digital saturation. For young people, this is their everyday life. A 2022 study by the National Literacy Trust found that over half of children rely on independent internet searches to understand current events, and yet confidence in evaluating what they find remains low. According to Ofcom, for example, only around 1/10 of 12 to 15-year-olds say that they feel very confident judging whether content online is true. This gap between constant access to information and the tools to question it leaves young people and us vulnerable to misinformation, manipulation, and misrepresentation. And that's why we created this course. It's a course that goes beyond helping students decode digital media. It invites them to re-examine their relationship with it. Through human stories, inquiry, and reflective practice, students explore the skills needed to navigate digital spaces with curiosity, care, and critical insight. Students and teachers learn not just to look out for misinformation, but to reflect on how digital content and algorithms shape their worldview, their emotions, and their sense of self, and how to respond with empathy, awareness, and a deeper understanding of impact. Traditional media literacy course ingredients, such as fact-checking and source analysis, they remain important, but they're no longer enough. What is needed is a critical, relational, and ethical approach to media literacy, one that's as much about how we think as how we connect. So critical, by this we mean able to interrogate systems and power, not just facts. Relational, being aware of how media shapes connection, identity, and belonging. And ethical, it's rooted in empathy, responsibility, and awareness of impact. This course is grounded in Lifter's human connection method, and more about the how of the course is detailed in the second short introductory video, which we invite you to watch next. Through immersive 360-degree story worlds, high-quality documentaries, and other resources, students encounter real people grappling with questions about AI, truth, and influence. Because critical digital literacy is no longer optional for any of us. It's the foundation of an informed, connected, and compassionate society. Welcome.
Thank you for watching that, everyone. So that's the sort of more detail on the course. And as I say, I think it's a really good complement for Yonder. I think we do have an urgent issue. I think that what Yonder does is phenomenal. And I've been to schools where they have it, and they are so different to schools that don't. But what do we do with the behavior of our children, the digital behavior of our children? This is so important in today's world, and that's what we're trying to help with.
It's awesome. And I think, Dami, you spoke as well about kind of the relationship with parents. And that sort of sense that you've got, they're at school for 8 hours a day, they're out of school for 16 hours a day. I wonder if any of the three of you, perhaps starting with Dami, can share a little bit about that sort of relationship between the school and the parent, and sort of how on board you found parents when you're talking about what's been involvement of parents, and sort of how can you work together and make this as effective as possible.
Yeah, so I think for us, we went through a consultation process. So I did assemblies to all the year groups, and then Tim's the head, wrote to parents saying, we're thinking of going in this direction. Please come in or book an appointment with either the head or I to talk about your thoughts on this. And we had lots of emails coming in saying, please don't tell my son, but I think this is a brilliant idea. Go right ahead and do it. We had parents come in and say, what do you need me to help you do to roll this out? Do you need me to do anything? Just tell me what I need to do, because I think this is brilliant. You had a few parents who were uncertain because they felt, is the school becoming a Luddite? Are you saying you don't want the children to engage with technology? And, for all the reasons I outlined earlier, we were able to deal with that. In terms of practicalities, when we had parents who were arguing that this was a material change to a behavior policy that needed to go through all the statutory processes, I was able to say to them, what Yonder is just a proxy for a rule that already exists. So we were quite lucky because we always had that we must not see your phone in school. If not, it would be confiscated. And so we could say, this is just a proxy for a rule that already exists. Nothing is changing here other than the fact that we are giving your children a tool to help them follow our expectations. And with that, they were very persuaded by that. And I think that's not even, me talking in sort of legal-esque speak to get around it. I think that's actually true. Yonder pouches are just proxies for enforcing a rule that exists in over 90% of schools. And I think one of the things that I was quite struck by was the fact that if I compared the experience of launching it here to my experience of launching initiatives in my previous school, which was in London and served a very deprived, in fact, the most deprived ward in London, I can see that there was a completely different response. And that's something that I think we all have to collectively as a society come to terms with, which is, unfortunately, it is the more well-off or socially capable schools that are making these decisions. And that's a problem, because it just means that the Matthew effect is in full flow.
And Lizzie, Serdar, how have you kind of engaged with parents? We have a question from Mel that some parents have said they would flatly refuse to permit it. How do you kind of navigate the other your partners in learning at the schools?
So just thank you. So just to kind of highlight, Yonder is definitely more than just a pouch. So the way we work is we do an entire program of partnering with the school, because obviously every community is different. And one of the big pieces of work we do is around parents, because I think where we tend to see pushback quite often, it's a lack of understanding. So when you explain to them that actually these are the procedures that you can get in touch with your child during the day. If the child has got medical needs, it means they do have access to their phone. No worries around that. We actually have a sort of Velcro pouch that means that they can access their phone during the day. So often when you go through and you answer those questions, and if you frame it in a really positive way, and if we make sure that parents understand that this is not a case of taking something away from the child, this is giving them back the access to that phone-free education. And it's quite empowering for parents to then realize that they're not, because they're facing these battles at home exactly the same as the teachers are in the classroom. And it's quite empowering for them if the school can really take the lead and kind of show the children actually what they should be accessing as part of their childhood, and what they can actually start to enjoy in terms of that real connectivity and that presence. Then it does have a genuinely positive impact on the home life. But yeah, you're always going to have parents who have concerns, but I think it's a case of the language, it's a case of kind of bringing them along with you and making them feel like they are part of that journey and that decision, but also accepting that with any policy that we bring in, you're never going to have everyone 100% happy, but if you can showcase the positive results, you then tend to find that the whole community is behind you in a really short space of time.
Yes, that's right. And just to speak to that in terms of, I think it depends on where your school was with their behavior policy before. I know that some schools that I've visited had, children were allowed to use their phones in between lessons and at break time. We never had that. It was always, you can have your phone, but it can't be visible on school site. And when we had parents who said no, which you will have parents who say no, absolutely not, we just said it's the same as saying to us, I will allow my child to punch other children. And I will always tell them that it's okay to punch other children. And obviously the behavior policy manages parents who respond like that, because when they subscribe to a school, they also subscribe to the school's behavior policies. And if they have a significant issue with it, there are other schools that are available. So we definitely went on that journey with Yonder, in that they very much go for a very positive approach. We had a jobbing actor turn up and do a fantastic happy assembly to all year groups. So they came away thinking, yeah, I'm getting on board with an amazing thing. Kevin Hart uses this for his concerts. Who am I to say no? It's Kevin Hart. And so the mood was very positive, and their approach is very positive. But then that 1 or 2% demographic who will always push back, you just have to manage through policy. And the DFE already gives us those powers.
Serdar, anything to add on the relationship with parents?
Our relationship with parents is generally feedback when the children go home and tell them about what they've learned. And so we've had parents get in touch and say, like, my child has never spoken about school like this before, thank you. And also with parents who do homeschooling. So we work with groups of parents around the country who do homeschooling, and we're just about to start the critical digital literacy course with one of those groups, which I'm really excited about. You asked about evidence earlier, and Harriet is a PhD from Cambridge. She's a massive researcher, so the course is actually topped and tailed with a baseline survey and an impact survey. So if schools did want to do the course and do an action research project, it's built for that.
Perfect. And yeah, and so from Adjurio's point of view, I'll paste a link into the chat around a post that we shared recently for those kind of weighing up whether to go ahead with a ban or to think about other options. As you said, you've done consultations with parents. There's Mel, you mentioned around running a survey specifically. I think I think one of the benefits of getting people's input in the beginning is Lizzie, you mentioned around making people feel like they've been part of the decision. That's major. I think if people feel they've been part of the decision, they're going to be more accepting of kind of helping you to then implement it. And I think there is a genuine benefit to making sure that people feel heard in part of the discussion, but there's also a genuine benefit in making sure that you understand the scale of the situation. So in the survey that I've posted there's a bit more information about it, but the survey, we have one for pupils, one for parents, and one for staff, and it's kind of a get going with a kind of state of where we are now. So understand how distracting pupils find phones in the classroom and how that compares to how distracting staff find phones within the classroom, thinking about impact on well-being, and then finishing with a sense of kind of whether or not a full ban would be welcomed or some other solution. And I think by being able to kind of triangulate between the three groups and seeing kind of which are who here is kind of really in favor of this, where have you got the big challenges, you can see where you need to direct your comms, and sort of the scale of what you're up against. And Dami, as you said, there's kind of, they're opting into your school, they're opting into the rules of your school. There are other schools available if they don't like it, but there's also, once you know kind of where you are in the beginning, you can start to kind of have that sort of evidence base and that understanding of where you need to go next. And like you said, Serdar, by doing that kind of initial survey, getting your baseline, and then coming back and studying the impact, that's the next part of it. If you can see, Dami, it looks like you've got kind of reams of qualitative evidence about how things are better, reams of examples, and so on, and being able to sort of say, yeah, this is at this time last year, this percentage of pupils were distracted in the classroom. Now this percentage of pupils is distracted in the classroom. You can sort of very quickly see kind of the impact of what it is that you've implemented. We're going to run out of time soon. We've only got 4 minutes left, so I'm gonna ask anyone who's on the chat who has a question to please post it within the chat. I've linked, I think, all of the resources that have been mentioned. I think I've linked into the chat, but whilst people are typing their last questions, I want to ask for some final words from the speakers. Serdar, is there anything that you've not said that you want anyone to be thinking about?
No, I think probably said enough, and I thank everyone. Well, actually, I'll say these things. Quality matters, particularly when all screens are not the same, all content is not the same, and I think we have to distinguish between a phone ban and then banning everything that we do that's digital in this world that our children are living in. It has to be second nature to them. Digital media is going to be second nature to them. So therefore, quality really matters. We think long and hard about the quality of the written text, the literature we put in front of our children. It's time we started to do that about the video content and moving image content we put in front of our children. So that's something that we feel really strongly about at Lifter.
Lovely. Lizzie, what about you?
Just to say that I think the best advocates we have are our schools. So if anyone's interested in actually just going to have a look, I know Dami's obviously got a revolving door of visitors, then I'll put my email in the chat. Please do feel free to get in touch, because the culture is so different. And I think the best way to realise that is to see it for yourself.
Perfect. Dami, anything from you?
Yeah, look, I think we know that phones are built on habit loops. We know that the only way to break a habit loop is to change the cue or the environment. And we know that the best way of changing the environment so that children can have attention and compassion is to break the cue. You break the cue by switching the phone off and putting it in a pouch. And that's the only way, psychologically speaking. So to my mind, it's as I say, settled science.
Lovely. And yeah, just wrapping up from me, I think, Serdar, you said it really nicely. We need to think really carefully about the quality. Lizzie, you mentioned around kind of slowing down, and I think, and Dami, you mentioned about kind of, you just said then breaking those habits. And I think the more we can do to make sure that any moment people are spending online is one that is nourishing and helping them to flourish, I think is really important. And so I hope that those of you who have attended today have found, or anyone who's catching up with the recording online, have found this discussion useful. I think one of the big things I want people to take away is that there are a range of options. We've particularly showcased a couple today, but there isn't, I don't think, a kind of one-size-fits-all solution. There isn't necessarily only one way that's going to work for you. This is about thinking about all the different options, making sure that we're learning from those around us. So yeah, thank you very much to everybody for joining us today. Hope you found it valuable.